Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The moment his hand closed around mine, steady, deliberate, unshaking, the air shifted and my husband stopped breathing. The other man guided me firmly, not with force but with intention. Every movement felt measured, every step controlled, as if he had already calculated how the room would react. My back brushed the edge of the table and I became suddenly aware of how small the space felt, how thick the silence had grown. Across from us, my husband stood motionless, his jaw tight, his eyes dark with something unreadable. Shock, anger, or something far more complicated. The room carried the faint scent of cologne and polished wood. Low music hummed somewhere in the background, forgotten now. What mattered was the distance between the three of us, the invisible current crackling in that narrow space. The other man didn't look at my husband, not once. His focus stayed on me, unwavering, as though the rest of the world had dissolved. "You don't have to pretend," he said quietly. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. I felt the weight of his palm at the small of my back, warm, grounding, possessive without being crude. The kind of touch that says I see you. The kind that lingers just long enough to make you question why you never stepped away. My husband shifted slightly, just enough to remind us he was still there, watching, and that was the real tension. This wasn't a stranger pulling me into reckless chaos. This was someone who had always been there at the edges, at dinners, at gatherings, in shared conversations that lasted a second too long. The glances had started as accidents, then they became acknowledgments, then they became something neither of us named, until now. The other man's authority wasn't loud, it was quiet, controlled, undeniable. It lived in the way he stood, in the certainty of his posture, in the way he guided rather than asked. He didn't rush, he didn't falter, and somehow that steadiness made my pulse race harder than anything impulsive ever could. I knew my husband could feel it too. There's a particular kind of silence that only exists when something irreversible is about to happen. It's heavy, pressurized, full of unspoken history. My marriage wasn't fragile, but it wasn't invincible either. And in this moment I could feel its boundaries being tested, stretched thin by something neither of us had confronted before. Was it betrayal, or was it honesty finally stepping into the light? My husband's eyes met mine, and for a flicker of a second I saw vulnerability there. Not weakness, not defeat. Just the realization that control had slipped from his hands without warning. He had always been the steady one, the grounded one, the one who set the tone. But tonight someone else held the rhythm. The other man's fingers tightened slightly, not painfully, just enough to remind me I was standing at a crossroads. The energy between the three of us was no longer subtle. It pulsed, it demanded acknowledgement, and the most dangerous part, no one stepped back. I should have moved. I should have broken the contact, softened the moment, turned it into a joke. But I didn't. Because beneath the tension, beneath the risk, there was something else. Something electric and intoxicating. Being seen. Not as a wife. Not as someone's responsibility. But as a woman standing in the center of two powerful forces. The music faded into nothing. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have. My husband took one step forward, just one. And everything inside me tightened in anticipation. What he would say next, what he would do, would change the course of all three of us. And none of us were ready for how far this night was about to go. The room seemed to shrink around us, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. Every small movement felt amplified. The faint brush of his sleeve against mine. The way his gaze lingered just a moment too long. I could feel the pull between us, subtle but undeniable, like electricity sparking through the air, threading through each hesitant breath. He spoke softly, almost too low for anyone else to hear, yet each word landed with weight. "You're not pretending anymore," he said, a hint of something unspoken threading through the calmness of his tone. I swallowed, my pulse accelerating despite my effort to appear composed. My husband shifted again, a slight cough breaking the near-perfect silence, and for the first time I realized just how exposed we all were in this delicate balance. Our eyes met, and the look that passed between us carried more than words could hold. It was recognition. A silent acknowledgement of the tension that had been building for months, maybe years. Every glance was a conversation, every pause a statement. He didn't touch me yet, but the promise of contact was in the air, heavy and almost tangible. I felt the tremor of anticipation in my chest, the quickened beat that betrayed the calm I tried to maintain. He tilted his head slightly, studying me as though reading my thoughts without permission. I wanted to look away, to reclaim some sense of control, but I couldn't. The moment held me captive, suspended in a delicate web of desire, authority, and restraint. The closeness between us was a language we were both fluent in, though neither dared speak it aloud. I shifted ever so slightly, and the brief contact of our arms sent a ripple through me that I couldn't ignore. My fingers brushed against his, accidental perhaps, but it sent a shiver that traveled from my fingertips to the hollow of my stomach. He noticed. I saw it in the subtle tightening of his jaw, the way his eyes darkened for just a fraction of a second. There was a restraint there, a deliberate holding back, and yet it made the tension all the more intoxicating. Everything in the room seemed sharper, the polished wood of the table, the faint scent of his cologne, the soft hum of music I hadn't noticed before. Each sound, each detail became a marker of the charged energy between us. I could almost feel the lines of control fraying, the invisible boundaries bending under the weight of what neither of us was admitting. We were close enough now that I could see the tiniest quiver of emotion in his eyes, a flicker of desire masked by composure. I wanted to speak, to bridge the space with words, yet the right ones eluded me. All that existed was this moment, suspended between what was proper and what was inevitable, a delicate tension that could unravel with the slightest movement. And even as my mind screamed for caution, my body betrayed me, leaning ever so slightly toward him. It was a gesture of curiosity, of longing, and of surrender to the undeniable chemistry that simmered between us. Nothing was resolved, nothing was claimed. Yet the room had changed irrevocably. We were standing on the edge of something intense, and both of us knew it. The tension in the room had become almost unbearable, a living, breathing thing that wrapped itself around our shoulders and pressed into our chests. Every glance, every slight movement was charged with unspoken meaning. I could feel it in my fingertips, the tremor that ran up my arm whenever his hand brushed mine. Even if only briefly. The air between us seemed to thrum with a secret rhythm, one only we were attuned to. I wanted to close the distance, to let the moment carry me forward, yet something invisible held me back. Years of loyalty, unspoken promises, and careful boundaries weighed heavily against the magnetic pull of his presence. I could see it mirrored in him, the subtle hesitation in the tilt of his head, the barely there pause before he shifted closer as if testing his own restraint. We were dancing on the edge of a precipice neither of us dared to acknowledge aloud. My husband's eyes lingered on us, silent but sharp. There was no anger, at least not the obvious kind, but a quiet intensity that made the moment all the more dangerous. It was a reminder that we were tethered by more than attraction, bound by a complex web of obligations, memories, and choices. Each fleeting touch, each accidental brush of fingers carried the weight of consequences we weren't ready to confront. He leaned slightly, just a fraction, and our breaths mingled in the narrow space between us. My chest tightened, a mixture of anticipation and fear. I wanted to close the distance, to let the magnetic pull take over, but I stopped myself, driven back by the awareness of what we were risking. And yet the desire lingered like a charged spark, refusing to die out. For a fleeting moment our hands grazed, nothing intentional, just the brush of skin against skin, and the current that ran through me was startling in its intensity. I saw it in his eyes too, the almost painful acknowledgement of how badly we wanted it, how carefully we restrained ourselves. Every inch of space between us felt impossibly large yet impossibly small at the same time. We both knew the danger of giving in. We both knew the fragility of what stood between us. And that made the longing all the more potent. Secrets whispered in silence, histories unspoken, boundaries drawn by circumstance all conspired to keep us apart. Yet in every stolen glance, in every hesitation, in every barely contained breath, those walls threatened to crumble. He stepped back, almost imperceptibly, and I felt a pang of disappointment that was instantly replaced by relief. Neither of us had said a word, yet the room seemed to sigh in unison. The moment wasn't over, not by a long shot, but it was suspended, fragile, delicate, waiting for a shift neither of us dared make. I wanted him, yes, more than I had admitted to myself in years. But the desire was entwined with fear, restraint, and a complicated tangle of loyalty and morality. And that tension, thick, electric, and simmering, was what made the room feel alive. It wasn't just attraction, it was a storm barely contained, waiting for the next spark to ignite it. And as we stood there, two people caught between longing and restraint, the air seemed to vibrate with what could be, with what should not be, and with the intoxicating uncertainty that neither of us could ignore. The room had narrowed until it felt like it belonged only to the two of us. Every sound, the soft hum of the lights, the distant city traffic faded into nothingness. All that remained was the heat of proximity, the almost unbearable tension that had been simmering for hours now coiling tighter with every heartbeat. I could feel him in every line of my vision, every subtle movement, and the pull between us was no longer subtle. It was magnetic, inescapable, undeniable. He stepped slightly closer, the air between us thick with anticipation. I wanted to step back, to remind myself of the boundaries that had always held us apart, but my feet refused to obey. It was as if gravity had shifted, and all I could do was lean into the invisible pull he exerted. His eyes held me captive, steady and unflinching, reading the thoughts I hadn't allowed myself to speak. "I shouldn't be here," he whispered, his voice low and rough with tension, carrying a weight that made my chest tighten. Even as he said it, the words didn't push me away. They drew me in. The confession hung in the air, a delicate fracture in the carefully maintained walls between us. It was more than an admission, it was the key to every secret longing we'd buried. I didn't respond. I couldn't, not with words. My lips parted slightly, my pulse hammering in my ears. And then, almost imperceptibly, our fingers brushed again, this time not by accident. The contact was brief, a spark that jolted through me, igniting the heat that had been simmering beneath the surface for so long. I could feel him react too, a subtle shift in his breath, the quiet catch of tension in his jaw. Everything slowed, the room, the moment, the world itself seemed to contract to that single point of connection. I could feel the invisible line between us, taut and vibrating, waiting for either of us to cross it. His gaze didn't waver, it held me like a promise, an unspoken question that neither of us dared to voice. My husband's presence faded into the periphery, a reminder of reality, yet the distance between us made it feel unreal, like we had stepped into a space where only the electricity of our connection existed. The longing between us was palpable, thick, tangible, almost suffocating in its intensity. We were close enough to feel each other's warmth, to sense the rhythm of each breath, and yet far enough to keep the restraint alive, teasing us with what could be. He leaned slightly, just enough that the movement alone made my heart spike. I felt the soft brush of his sleeve against my arm, the subtle heat of proximity, the way his presence pressed against the edges of my self-control. I wanted to close the distance, I wanted to surrender, and yet the restraint, the delicious, torturous restraint, kept us suspended on the edge. Then he whispered my name. Just my name. It hung in the air between us, fragile, electric, full of promise. I couldn't speak, I could barely breathe. The moment stretched, lingering in the charged silence, the heat between us tangible, palpable, undeniable. And in that suspended heartbeat it felt like we had already crossed the line without moving at all. The night wrapped around us like a velvet cloak, soft rain streaking the windows and casting a silver glow across the room. Shadows danced on the walls, shifting with the flicker of candlelight and the distant shimmer of streetlights. Every sound, the gentle patter of rain, the quiet hum of the city, seemed amplified, yet it belonged only to us. In that moment the world had shrunk to the space we occupied, taut with tension and brimming with unspoken longing. He moved closer, just close enough that the heat radiating from him brushed against me, a quiet, deliberate contact that made my pulse quicken. I didn't step back, I couldn't. My breath caught as our shoulders brushed, a soft electric connection that seemed to speak the words we both had kept locked away. My lips barely parted, and for a heartbeat it felt as if the world had paused, waiting for us to acknowledge the magnetism between us. Her breath melted into his, not with urgency but with a slow, deliberate intimacy that carried the weight of months, years of unspoken tension. Every subtle movement, every accidental graze of fingers spoke louder than any words could. Their eyes held secrets, confessions and promises, a language only they understood. The quiet closeness, the deliberate stillness of the space between them, was a crescendo in its own right, a symphony of desire restrained then finally freed. The room seemed to pulse with the rhythm of their shared heartbeat. Every subtle shift, the tilt of a head, the brush of a hand along an arm, conveyed everything that had been simmering beneath the surface. It was magnetic, intoxicating, and utterly consuming. I could feel the warmth radiating from him, the strength in the curve of his posture, the softness in the way he leaned into the moment. It was a surrender of souls more than bodies, a quiet communion of energy, of intimacy, of longing finally allowed to breathe. The rain tapped softly against the windows, a soothing percussion to the rhythm building between them. Candlelight flickered across his face, highlighting the intensity in his eyes, the slight parting of his lips, the way his gaze softened when it met hers. She leaned ever so slightly, a subtle yielding to the gravity of the connection, her pulse echoing in her chest. Their bodies spoke the words they couldn't say: forgiveness, desire, acknowledgement, and the exquisite thrill of finally letting go. Time lost all meaning. The night, the rain, the muted glow of the city outside, They were nothing but the backdrop to the quiet explosion of emotion that surged between them. No words were necessary, nothing explicit needed to be said. Every small gesture, every slow deliberate breath carried them higher, letting the intensity of their closeness do the talking. In the silence, in the shared warmth and the brush of skin, the world fell away. They existed only in each other, and in that surrender the beauty of the moment was breathtaking, raw and poetic. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, soft and unassuming, but it could not erase the weight that hung in the room. The air smelled faintly of rain and candle smoke, the remnants of a night that had changed everything. Silence filled the space, thick and almost reverent, each of us caught in the aftermath of what had unfolded. Nothing had been spoken, yet everything had been said. He sat near the edge of the couch, shoulders tense, eyes tracing the patterns of sunlight across the floor. She lingered by the window, fingers lightly brushing the glass as though trying to anchor herself to reality. The storm of the night had passed, but its residue remained raw, undeniable and almost painfully intimate. There was guilt, yes, a sharp edge that gnawed quietly at the corners of thought. But beneath it there was also a fragile peace, as if something unspoken had finally been acknowledged between them. Her gaze met his, and in that instant she saw it. The vulnerability hidden beneath his calm exterior. The quiet acknowledgement of the connection they had shared. It wasn't just desire anymore. It was understanding, recognition, a deepening of something that had been simmering for too long. Yet even in that recognition there was hesitation, a lingering question of whether they had crossed a line that could ever be repaired. A soft sigh escaped her lips, barely audible, yet it seemed to fill the room. "I don't know what comes next," she admitted, her voice trembling with honesty. The words hung in the air like delicate glass, fragile but impossible to ignore. He didn't answer immediately. Instead he reached out, lightly brushing her hand with his fingers, a gesture that spoke volumes more than words ever could. The tension remained, thick and unrelenting, but it had shifted. It was no longer solely about what had happened, it was about what it meant, and how it would shape the space between them. Every glance, every measured movement was a dialogue of its own, a careful negotiation between what they wanted and what they knew they should preserve. Then unexpectedly the front door opened. A familiar voice, tinged with curiosity and concern, drifted through the hallway. A visitor early and unaware had arrived, unaware of the fragile equilibrium that now existed in the room. The moment snapped, a sudden intrusion into the cocoon of intimacy and reckoning. Hearts leapt in startled unison, and the spell of the morning shifted. Secrets, unspoken yet potent, now faced the light of day. Yet even with the interruption the connection remained deeper now, more enduring than before. The shared understanding, the charged glances, the quiet moments of vulnerability had built a bridge that no visitor, no words could dismantle. They were changed. Individually and together, standing at the edge of possibility, aware that what had been awakened between them could never fully be contained again. Outside the rain had slowed to a soft drizzle, sunlight glinting off the wet pavement. Inside the room held its own reflection of the night. Shadows lingering, warmth diffused, hearts racing quietly. They were human, messy, longing, tethered together by something unspoken yet unbreakable, a truth that had finally been acknowledged, even if it carried consequences they were only beginning to grasp. The room was quiet now. The lingering tension of the past nights softened into something warmer, gentler. Sunlight spilled in through the half-open curtains, casting a golden glow that seemed to settle over everything, over them as if the world itself was exhaling. They sat across from each other, not needing words. The unspoken understanding between them had grown into something deeper than desire, a fragile, delicate intimacy that carried with it both the memory of their longing and the quiet promise of what could come. Her hand rested lightly near his, close enough to feel the warmth without crossing a line, and he let his fingers brush hers. That small contact said more than any confession ever could. It was acknowledgement, a careful tether in the aftermath of their storm. A quiet reassurance that despite everything, they had seen each other truly. Her gaze softened, not with uncertainty, but with the profound recognition that this connection, whatever form it took, had changed them irrevocably. He leaned forward slowly, resting his forehead gently against hers. The simple contact spoke of peace, of surrender, of a willingness to accept what had been and what might yet be. Their breaths mingled in a slow rhythm, hearts adjusting to the new cadence of a shared understanding. In that fragile moment the world outside could have fallen away entirely. They would have still existed in the quiet orbit of each other. There was no rush, no need for finality. The past with all its tension, temptation and unspoken confessions had led them here to a moment of calm, of choice and of presence. The emotions that had roared like wildfire now softened into warmth, a slow burning glow that settled over their skin and hearts alike. Every glance, every touch, every silent breath was a testament to the journey they had traveled together. The invisible lines crossed, the barriers acknowledged and in some cases let go. Outside the rain had stopped, leaving the world glistening, cleansed and renewed. Inside the room felt lighter, infused with a quiet intimacy that needed no embellishment. Their lips didn't meet, not yet, but the closeness, the shared heartbeat, the soft tremor of their connection was enough. They didn't need words, they didn't need actions. They had this lingering warmth, this suspended moment of beauty, this acknowledgement that some connections defy explanation but leave their mark forever. And as they remained there side by side yet suspended in the delicate space between longing and fulfillment, there was a truth neither could deny, that some moments, some nights, some people, leave an imprint that is eternal. Whether they stayed together or parted, the memory of what had passed between them would linger like a faint perfume, intoxicating, bittersweet and unforgettable. For now there was quiet, there was peace, and there was each other, in the way that mattered most, fully present, fully human, fully seen.